CNBC TV18, Adobe present Experience Makers.
Hello and welcome to CNBC TV18 and Adobe present Experience Makers. To set the context, we are in a world today where every keystroke, every click shapes the future, shapes the world of tomorrow. And in that context, when that happens, digital transformation is not just a strategy, it is a necessity. And in that context, we are seeing the evolution arc now coming up towards generative AI and truly transform the landscape that we are seeing today and possibly tomorrow, especially when we look at the implications. It's not just a technology, it's a driving force to change companies, to drive up productivity, drive up creativity, and we have just scratched the surface. So today in our conversation titled Unlocking the Future, Scaling Digital Transformation with Generative AI, we have with us 4 leaders from diverse sectors who will share stories from the trenches as to how generative AI is transforming their enterprises, both from a use case perspective and, of course, from an enablement perspective. Let's do a quick round of introductions, starting with Neetan, CIO of Indigo. He is with us, the aviation perspective as we see fit. And, of course, next up is Piyush Kumar, Vice President for Product at Make My Trip. He is with us as well. And joining in that list is Saurabh Kulak, Head of CX, Digital and AI at TVS Motors. And finally, we have with us Amitabh Mishra, who is the Vice President for Engineering at Adobe. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and looking forward to hearing stories from the trenches from each of your respective enterprises. Neetan, we'll start with you because the aviation sector is always the sharpest end of the innovation sphere and the business sphere as well, because you always have to look at the bottom line. You have to keep a razor sharp focus on the bottom line. So in terms of saving costs and driving up productivity, tell us the basics that you've seen, the impact that you've seen from generative AI.
So I think, if you just deep dive and look at, AI is going to have a profound impact on everything airline, right? All processes, right? But if you just look specifically at cost saving, just where employees are deployed today, call centers, you probably don't know, but employee centers have a fair bit of cost in large airlines. Then if you just look at operations of an airline, right, it's full of potential for efficiency, right? Disruption management, the way we roster our crew, the way the workforce is managed, right? So you can see pretty much AI percolating into all of these aspects, right? And one of my biggest areas where I think generative AI or AI will make an impact, which is not yet done, is in this whole field of disruption management, right? So if I just take a minute, and share what I mean there is, it's like an orchestra. If you're playing an orchestra, there's a conductor, right? Think about a symphony being played. And just imagine that there is a monkey in the room, right? And it goes and it disrupts the guy who's, kind of conductor, throws the thing down, right? Every few minutes disrupts, right? This is how the airline world actually in operates, right? So we have a clear plan that we put out, the schedule, and then every minute, every few hours, some disruption happens, ATC, weather. So ability to rejig that and get it back into that rhythm and that music, back the orchestra playing is one of the areas, right? Like, so there are so many, Gautam. Right?
All right. So stabilizing influence, when you look at it from a broad perspective, that brings in the cost saving and operational efficiency and other threads that we will add to this conversation as we move ahead. Fantastic. That's the aviation side of things. Let's look at the broader travel universe, and let me bring in Piyush for the Make My Trip perspective, especially when we look at the implications that generative AI brings to the table. Broadly from these two perspectives, tell us about the changes that Gen AI has brought about to Make My Trip.
Sure, Gautam. So broadly, if you see, right, so online travel especially, right, so and travel by nature is very nuanced, right? Even having an online purchase of travel, you do good amount of form filling, right? So with good amount of inputs before you buy anything, right? So if you look at the broader spectrum of any user journey of buying any travel or going on tour trip, it starts with typically an inspiration, discovery, decision making, and then booking, and then post-booking experience, etc. Right? So within that entire spectrum of customer experience, right? So how we look at primarily like, so from Make My Trip standpoint, right? So one of the opportunities which we saw with generative AI, and like, so last year, right? So when we post GPT 3.5 and then subsequently, like, so during that journey, right? So we did good amount of work, primarily not using the technology by GPTs, plus integrating the voice tech, right? So speech to text, text to speech. So the combination played it beautifully with the launch of Myra, which is our voice chat expert bot.
Let's come to Saurabh Kullar for his point of view on this, because when we look at it from the benefits that generative AI is bringing to the table for TVS Motors, your brand is a pioneer when it comes to digitalization and AI implementation. So your thoughts on what Gen AI is changing, both from, say, a supply side, from a manufacturing perspective, when we look at, the back end, and from a demand side, how are things changing?
Yeah, I think TVS is known as a customer-first company, right? Most of our products are innovated, keeping customers in mind. As we run our businesses, we really hold customer journeys at the center of what we do, right? And that will spread across your shop, buy, own episodes, right from awareness down to subscription, because most of the vehicles are now connected and digital. So the kind of information that we're able to, glean out and give better experiences to customers is high. All right, and as we look at these journeys, we look at Gen AI use cases in terms of personalization in a big way. All right, that works for ensuring. So an automotive buying journey is not an instant journey, right? It's not a purely digital journey. It's a phygital journey. In our context, in many cases, it's also a family decision. All right, and which means there are going to be questions, queries, opinions, right, as a customer walks through our entire experience.
So which stage of the funnel do you see more applications? Because there's the pre-purchase, there's purchase and after sales, right? Typically for your product. And the problem sometimes always is that you're selling a product where you might not see the customer back buying another product for a certain period of time, which is where the after sales experience becomes more important, because it still keeps the customer engaged with you. So at which stage of the funnel do you see generative AI making more of an impact?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I would think almost across the stages, right? Of course, your shop buy and episodes are sort of more go-to, but if you look at the ownership experiences, that's where some of the use cases are really interesting.
Let me come to Amitabh for his point of view, his reactions to what he's heard so far. And considering Adobe is at the forefront of all these technological innovations that are coming through, your thoughts on how you envision Gen AI sort of reshaping the landscape of digital innovation?
So I'll talk about a couple of dimensions. One is that we, of course, look at a wide variety of industries and we see some common patterns. Like, we feel that it's going to reshape creativity in a big way. We have a very strong suite of products in that area. It's going to increase productivity in a very, very big way. Is going to allow faster development and rapid prototyping in a big way. Is going to lower the entry barrier on some of the fields that required, professionals to just, if you can express your feeling, then the software and the generation part of the software is going to do the job for you. I'll give you an example of the last one immediately. We introduced our foundation model-based, Firefly-based, generative fill in Photoshop. Earlier, it used to take, some level of expertise on Photoshop to, take an image and expand it. Now it's a button click and the generative fill is done. We have upcoming products where the brand, generated content that is used in marketing communication required a certain amount of expertise, and also, brand approvals, everything took weeks to do. Now you can generate all that with English prompts, with the brand intent in mind, with the brand collateral, so that what is generated in a matter of few minutes is brand safe. You have multiple variations of that. So, like in the case of Adobe, we have petabytes of behavioral data. We know how one customer would respond to one image versus another to another image. That's how, so when all that behavioral data along with content is merged, then it just becomes personalized. So a customer with a certain persona will see a different content from the brand from another. So if we have the capability to rapidly generate a very large number of variants, then those variants can be experimented with segments of customers which are different. And then you can personalize and go one by one. And then you can experiment, try all that. That
We are
was
in a
for
brave
many,
new
many
world.
weeks.
Creativity and innovation at the click of a button.
Exactly.
All right, Piyush, let me get your response to that because it perfectly syncs with what you mentioned earlier. And when we talk about, reshaping customer experiences, especially in the travel sector, because you want to bring more of those customers onto your brand, onto, making travel as a default part of their lives. How do you see Gen AI kind of reshaping customer experiences and in a sense changing customer habits? Because when we look at customer journey, it's gone from singular to plural, right? And whether we look at pre-purchase, purchase, post-purchase, everything now has many steps along the way. So how do you make sure that everything is working in service of your objectives?
Yeah. So as Amitabh said, right, so personalization is going to be disrupted, right? So, and the other thing which he said primarily, wherein earlier software used to eat the rest of the businesses and other pieces. Now generative AI is going to eat the software as well, right? So good amount of disruption both on productivity and other pieces as well, right? And the amount of content which is getting generated because of the Gen AI capabilities baked in. But in travel especially, right, so most of the travel is very contextual, right? Every trip is unique, right? You have work trip, you have leisure trip, solo trip, friends trip, family trips, to everything, right? So your preferences change with everything. And there are nuances to each and every unique trip itself, right? So you may want to sit on aisle seat by default, but so if you're traveling with your mother, parents, etc., you may choose to do something else, right? So and the behavior changes, right, with the context primarily.
On that note, we'll take a very short break here on CNBC TV18 and Adobe presents Experience Makers. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
CNBC TV18, Adobe present Experience Makers. CNBC TV18, Adobe present Experience Makers.
Welcome back to CNBC TV18 and Adobe presents Experience Makers, where we are discussing with leaders from a variety of sectors on the possibilities that generative AI is bringing to the table for a variety of use cases. Neetan, getting back to the conversation, I want to talk about generative AI now more on a strategic aspect, because when we look at a strategic vision for integrating generative AI across your airline's technological DNA, what's the roadmap looking like?
I think it was, what was it, Gary Hamel who said, right, that strategy is about making the future happen. And today, as we stand today at this inflection point, right, I think all my colleagues are saying similar things. It was perhaps a lot of winters over the years for AI, but it's real, it's here, it's having a profound impact. So I think strategically thinking of having AI baked into pretty much everything we do is a key mantra for us, right? And how do you go about doing that? I guess, as I was just explaining previously, having perhaps one runway, Gautam, of rapid innovation, like we have with our Lab 37, to some extent permissionless, get on with deployment. I did innovation labs for a number of years in my previous life, and one of the key things I've learned is nothing like going live with your innovation, getting it out of POC. So having that runway, at the same time having another strategic runway which looks at how do you bake this into every process, and third, and perhaps even equally important, having the cybersecurity and regulation runway along with it.
Saurav, let me bring you in to talk about the design and development of vehicles. How is generative AI sort of playing a role in improving that, and then as a net effect, improving the driving experience?
I think in terms of prototyping, right, what goes into making a design that a certain segment of customers are going to like, right? So I think in terms of prototyping, being able to visualize what it's going to be, right? The second is, of course, embedding it into manufacturing IoT, right? That helps sort of operational processes go further, right? As we get into sort of driving behavior, I think it's also about understanding our vehicles once customers are using them, right? And that allowing us to understand customers better. I think an important aspect for us, you spoke about it a little bit earlier, is eventually, AI is data, right? And I think that there is an element of trust, which is really going to fuel how this moves forward, especially when it comes to driving behavior, right? And that layer is important for us to look at data sort of plus trust and AI, right? And that's really where that disruption is going. But it's almost like saying that as a customer, you can talk to your vehicle, talk to your TVS vehicle, you can ask it how it's feeling today, right? And in essence, you will get data pointers, right? And to know how you're riding, what to do with it. And that's where I'm going with the trust, because safety of our customers is also our responsibility.
One aspect we haven't discussed, and Neetan, let me bring you in for your thoughts, is while we talked about compliance earlier with you, cybersecurity, right? That's going to be a big conversation around when we look at generative AI and its possibilities. You also have to make sure that you have walled your assets off correctly so that it doesn't cause a problem in the long run. So your thoughts on the cybersecurity aspect?
Yeah, as I said earlier, the fact of life is, I'm sure you've got to do both innovate at the edges as well as protect, right? So cybersecurity, I think, it's almost like doing D2C. It's continuous investment and continuous staying ahead of the game, right? Defense in depth is a standard strategy that pretty much everybody deploys, just making sure there's layered defense, right? And then, of course, with my view on privacy is, most people do privacy, Gautam, for the worry of those 4% GDP fines, but just have a conversation with your kids. My daughter, for example, she's very worried, about privacy, about sustainability. The young generation is quite conscious about all of these important things. So as we build our beautiful brands for this future generation, I think we should do it for that purpose, for the purpose of customer intimacy, right? While, of course, also making sure that all the regulatory things are covered, right?
Let's take this conversation forward. So we've discussed cybersecurity. So let me bring you in on the skill sets aspect, right? Because when we look at Gen AI implementations, the sort of skill sets which are going to be necessary for organizations to make sure that they're properly leveraging Gen AI. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in terms of skill sets within the organization, we spoke about EX a little bit earlier, right? It's about what kind of an environment we're able to craft for our, for our teams, right, that are going to be working on these. I was talking about anecdotally before the meeting in terms of how we have scaled in terms of our digital skill sets within TVS, right? If I'm a data scientist, historically was an automobile, a player, the right space for me to be. I think that's where we started from. And it's fair to say that, hey, right now TVS is a great place for a data scientist to be, right? Because the kind of opportunities, the kind of projects, the kind of opportunities to implement what you're doing for customers and to be able to see how they're reacting to it, to be able to protect that, right? I think that's where really the genesis of that energy happens.
All right, Amitabh, let me come to you for your thoughts. And we have discussed, the cybersecurity skill set. I also want to look at ethical deployment of generative AI. So I want to take Adobe's experience and take us through how you do it, and how do you make sure there are steps in place to ensure, fairness, transparency, so on and so forth.
So we are very cognizant of the ethical aspect of technology, because we enable so many businesses to create content and create experiences. And we put a lot of energy and research across the world in this area. So we are ensuring that the data that goes in to train the models is safe, inclusive. We constantly monitor the inferences for biases and fairness, and we have constantly monitoring of humans as well in this interaction. Let me give you an example of where we have succeeded phenomenally. Adobe started, Content Authenticity Initiative, which has now 2,000 members. including, camera companies like Leica and Nikon, and the media companies, BBC, Getty's Image, Wall Street Journal, and such, where we want to attribute the creator to the creation. So the metadata of the creation, let's say an image created on camera, is containing the author's details in a secure and private way, encrypted way, and wherever the content travels, the content creator's details also travel.
All right, so taking these points forward, which industries do you see generative AI having the most transformative effects, and how is Adobe empowering marketers in these industries?
So every industry is going to be touched by and transformed by generative AI. I cannot imagine an industry that will not be transformed. The degree will vary to the extent that the industry is digitized. So some industries like, Make My Trip are completely digital. Their experience and their interaction, everything is digital. So that'll have much more profound impact compared to others. The creator economy is phenomenally digital. So going back to marketing, we have a suite of, called Gen Studio, which has Gen AI embedded into the entire content supply chain, from ideation to creation to production to activation. The entire thing Gen AI embedded at all levels. And I talked about in my earlier, when I mentioned that the content creation is exploding. And what content creation, I mean the assets like the images and videos and so on, but also the entire marketing collateral. So marketing is going to get impacted in a very, very big way. You know that marketing collateral creation and everything else, company spends hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars. Generative AI is going to 100% transform them. Like I said, one of the technologies that we have, and we are going to launch it, is email content authoring, where from the images to the content to the layout to the intent of the marketing and including the existing brand collateral, so it's brand safe, all generated in a matter of few minutes compared to many, many weeks earlier.
I'm sure many of the marketers watching this show are going to be very happy, and not just the marketers, but the broader stakeholders in the business ecosystem are going to be happy as to the potential that is now going to be realized when this Gen AI revolution picks up even more steam. But on that note, it's time to wrap up our conversation with the leaders titled CNBC TV18 and Adobe Present Experience Makers. Thank you to everyone for sharing their insights on this topic. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Till next time, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off. Have a great day.
CNBC TV18, Adobe Present, Experience Makers.